Now that you have a big picture view of what component state is and how it helps us create meaningful applications, let's go ahead and actually use it. And as promised, we're going to be taking things nice and slow. So we're going to be using state in a few different ways. To kick things off, we're just going to go ahead and recreate the counter example using component state. Later on, you will recreate the build it visible example, and then finally we'll integrate it into the indecision application. So if you don't have this file in place, that is okay. You can just go ahead and recreate it. If you have the file in place and your code is different, that's fine too. We're actually just going to kick things off by highlighting everything and commenting out all of those lines. We're going to use it as a reference, so I will keep it around, but we're going to be building up from scratch. This code was written quite some time ago. We didn't know about component classes. We didn't know that we could create methods on those classes. And finally, we just have a variable that manages our application state. We're going to be using component state instead. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this file, and I will close all of the other files, keeping things nice and clutter free. And the last thing I'm going to do is switch up the command that's running over inside of the terminal. Instead of running the app file, we are going to run the counter example file, and then we'll just confirm it's actually showing up in the browser. Then we'll write some code. So that is sitting in the source playground folder. In my case, it is called counterexample.js. And once I go ahead and run it over in the browser, I should get an empty screen since there is no code related to that project. Step one is going to be getting something rendered to the screen. Currently, we have nothing at all. So we're going to go ahead and get our H1 and our 3 buttons rendered. And step one is going to be to create a new component for that stuff. I'm going to create a new class, and we'll call this component counter. And we are going to need to extend React.component. And once we have extended React.component, we can go ahead and add the one thing we have to add, our render method. And render is going to return a div, and we're going to set up our H1s much like we have below with the buttons down below. We will return inside of parentheses our div. Inside of the div, we're going to add the 4 things we want to show to the screen, the first one being the H1. Now at this point, we don't have all of the information to populate the H1. We don't really know how we're going to get the state, so we're going to ignore that for the moment. And I'm just going to put in count, :space, and we'll leave the number blank. So later on, we're going to have a number showing up. For now, we'll just leave that off. We also need our buttons, so we can set those up. We're going to have the 3 buttons, the same 3 buttons we have down below. I can take that button and copy it and paste it 2 times. Now we want a +1 button to add 1 to the count. We want a -1 button to remove 1 from the count. And we're going to have a reset button that just sets the count equal to 0. Let's go ahead and actually get the static component rendered to the screen using React DOM.render. That is React DOM.render. And we pass in the 2 arguments, what we want to render and where we want to render it. What do we want to render? We just want to render counter. So we'll set up our component in a JSX expression like that. And where do we want to put it? We want to put it in the div with the ID of app. So we'll use document.getElementById. And the element has an ID of app. Excellent. Now at this point, we have no interaction, but if I save the program, we should at least see our static data, and we are indeed getting that showing up, which is a fantastic first step. The next thing we want to do is actually set up 3 methods. We want to set up 3 onClick handlers, and we want to make sure those methods are firing when each button gets clicked, and that is actually going to be your challenge for the video. So step 1 is going to be to create 3 methods. These 3 methods will be handle add1, that'll be for the +1 button. We're also going to have handle -1 for the -1 button. And finally, we'll have handle reset, which should fire when the reset button gets clicked. Now inside of each of these later on, we're going to be manipulating the component state, but we don't have that set up. We don't know about that just yet. So all we're going to do is use alert or console.log to print something to the screen when the button gets clicked. Use console.log to print the method name. So when I click the +1 button, handle add1 is going to fire, and I should see handle add1 print down below. We'll do the exact same thing for handle -1 and handle reset. Now, once you do have the methods in place and they're logging something, you want to wire up onClick. You want to wire up onClick for all 3 buttons, and you want to bind in the constructor function. So just like we learned about the bindings in the previous videos, we want to make sure to also bind these guys to the component instance. That's going to be essential when we move forward. So take some time to knock this one out, and when you're done, test your work. You can test your work by clicking the 3 buttons and making sure you see the appropriate messages showing up as the buttons get clicked. Go ahead and pause the video. When you're done, click play. All right, let's go ahead and knock that one out. Step 1 being creating those methods. I'm going to start off with handle add 1. This one doesn't need any arguments, and then we're just going to use console.log to print handle add 1 to the screen. Nothing earth-shattering here. Next up is handle -1. Handle -1 is going to fall in the exact same boat. We just console.log a string. And reset's actually going to be a little different. No, I'm just kidding. It's going to be exactly the same. So we're going to set up handle reset, and we are going to log handle reset. Perfect. Now we have the 3 methods in place, and they're correctly logging something, so that knocks out these 2 steps. The last thing we have to do is wire up onClick, and we want to bind them in the constructor function. I'm going to wire up onClick first, so we're going to set up onClick for each of these. For +1, we want to access this dot handle add 1. Excellent. Now down below, we want to wire up onClick for -1. Inside of our JavaScript expression, the function we want to have called when the button gets clicked is this dot handle -1. Last up is reset. This dot handle reset. Awesome. So we have the onClick handler set up. The final part of the challenge was to correctly bind these guys in the constructor function. We're going to go ahead and do that right here by defining constructor. Now we know when we override constructor, we get those props and we have to call super. Otherwise, we break things. So we're going to call super, passing in the props. And from here, we can actually do something meaningful, the thing we came here to do. And in our case, it is just to rebind those 3 methods. That'll be this dot handle add 1. We're going to set it equal to itself. But we're going to go ahead and use bind to bind it to the current component instance. And then we can go ahead and do the same thing 2 more times down below. I'm going to go ahead and just take this line, duplicate it twice. Right here, we're going to have handle -1. Same thing right here. And down below, we'll use handle reset. Setting handle reset equal to itself, but bound to the correct component instance when the callback eventually fires. Now at this point, we can go ahead and test our work. We've completed the challenge, so I'm going to save the counter example file, and I'm going to start clicking some buttons. So I click +1, we have handle add 1 show up for every button click. I have -1, reset, and everything shows up in the correct order. So we're getting all 3 printing for the 3 buttons, which means that we have a basic version of the counter component using all of the tools and techniques we already know about. I'm going to go ahead and remove the challenges comments, and in the next video, we're going to go through the 5 steps necessary to set up component state in counter. Those are going to be the exact same things we explored in the slides in the last video. I'm real excited to get to it, so I will see you in the next one.